Every empire that ever conquered Iran expected its civilization to disappear. Alexander burned Persepolis to the ground in 330 BC. Arab armies shattered the Sassanid state at Nahavand. The Mongols reduced entire cities to ash and bone. Foreign powers toppled its elected government as recently as 1953. Yet 3,000 years after its first empire rose, Iran remains. No civilization on Earth has absorbed this much destruction and emerged with its identity not just intact, but defiant. The question is not whether Iran survived. It is how. On the windswept plateau of ancient Persia, a new vision of empire took root under Cyrus II and Darius I. From the heart of Pasargadae to the rising terraces of Persepolis, their rule did not rely on brute force alone. Instead, they built an imperial order grounded in administration, a system designed to outlast the ambitions of any single king. The royal inscriptions at Behistun, carved in Old Persian, Elamite, and Akkadian, proclaimed the king's authority in every tongue spoken across the empire's vast domains. These trilingual records were more than royal boasts. They formed the backbone of a bureaucracy that stretched from the Aegean to the Indus. Darius I, inheriting the mantle of Cyrus, divided the empire into satrapies, provinces governed by satraps, responsible for tax collection, law, and security. Each satrap was bound by oath, but also by a network of royal inspectors and a system of checks that reached back to the king himself. The Apadana Terrace at Persepolis, with its forest of columns and processional reliefs, stood as the ceremonial heart of this order. Here, envoys from every corner of the empire brought tribute, their costumes and gifts immortalized in stone. The architecture was not merely decorative. It was a statement of unity and diversity, and of central command. The Royal Road, stretching over 2,500 kilometers, linked the satrapal capitals to Persepolis and Susa. Couriers could carry messages from Sardis to the imperial center in just 7 days, an achievement that stunned Greek chroniclers. Tax registers and administrative tablets, preserved in the archives at Persepolis, reveal a world of scribes, accountants, and local officials, each one a cog in an imperial machine designed for endurance. The Persian model of governance, blending centralized authority with regional adaptation, would echo through centuries, shaping not just the fate of Iran, but the very idea of empire itself. At the empire's outer rim, where the Iranian plateau met the shifting frontiers of Rome and the steppe, a different kind of Persian order took root. The Parthians, heirs to nomadic traditions, governed not from stone palaces, but from horseback. Their power rested on mobility, an army of armored cataphracts and swift horse archers, ready to vanish into the plains or reappear at a moment's notice. In 53 BC, this doctrine reached its zenith under the command of Serena. At Carrhae, Serena's cavalry encircled the Roman legions, unleashing a storm of arrows and feigned retreats. The Roman force, 35,000 strong, was broken and scattered. 20,000 were killed or captured. Rome's banners fell into Parthian hands, a humiliation that echoed across continents. Yet the Parthians were more than warriors. Their diplomacy relied on the same mobility that won them battles. Instead of fixed borders, they managed a web of alliances and vassal kings, using cavalry raids and swift negotiations to keep both Rome and nomads at bay. Power was diffuse, authority personal. Nobles called conquerors governed their own domains, pledging loyalty to the Arsacid king, but acting with near independence. Messages traveled faster than armies. Treaties could be made or broken on the gallop. This was governance by movement, a state that flexed with the wind. The Sassanids, rising in the 3rd century AD, saw the dangers of such fluidity. Ardashir I, founder of the dynasty, set out to forge a different legacy. At Nakhche-Rostam, his rock relief proclaims a new vision. The king flanked by priests and officials, holding the ring of power. Ardashir built a centralized bureaucracy, a diwan that codified law, land, and tax. Legal texts carved in stone and written on parchment set standards for justice from Ctesiphon to the furthest satrapy. The Sassanid legal corpus, one of antiquity's most sophisticated, regulated property, inheritance, and religious practice. Administration became a tool of endurance, not just conquest. In this way, Iran's statecraft adapted to the world's shocks. Where the Parthians had mastered the art of movement, the Sassanids anchored their rule in law and ritual. Both models, one carried on horseback, the other inscribed in stone, would shape the resilience of Iran's institutions, preparing the nation for the storms that lay ahead. In the spring of 330 BC, flames consumed the terraces of Persepolis. Alexander of Macedon, standing among toppled columns and blackened reliefs, ordered the city's destruction, a gesture both theatrical and devastating. The fire signaled more than the end of an empire. It was the opening act in a new era of collision and cross-pollination. The Macedonian phalanx, with its bristling wall of sarissas, had swept through the heart of Persia, shattering armies that had once ruled from the Nile to the Indus. Yet conquest brought more than ruin. In the ashes, new cities rose: Alexandria in Arachosia and Antioch in Persis, each stamped with Greek coinage bearing the image of Alexander, but minted with Persian silver and inscribed with local motifs. The conqueror's army moved as a machine, disciplined ranks drilled in tactics unknown to the Persian hosts. But as the dust settled, the victors became settlers. Greek veterans married Persian women, adopted local dress, and filled the new administrative posts left vacant by the fallen satraps. On the streets of these hybrid cities, one could hear Greek and Aramaic in the markets, see Macedonian helmets beside Persian robes, and watch the rituals of Zoroaster performed alongside the sacrifices to Zeus. Silver tetradrachms began to circulate, their reverse sides blending Hellenic gods with Persian iconography. A lion here, a cuneiform legend there. Temples and gymnasia stood beside fire altars. The blueprint for rule shifted. Greek city councils governed with Persian scribes at their elbows, and royal decrees bore the double seal of East and West. In the wake of Persepolis' destruction, Persian culture did not vanish. Instead, it absorbed and transformed, creating a world where conqueror and conquered shaped a new, layered identity. The shock of Alexander's conquest seeded a legacy of adaptation, setting the stage for centuries of fusion and survival. In the aftermath of Nahavand in 642 AD, the Iranian plateau entered a new era of governance. The old Sasanian court had fallen, but the machinery of administration did not simply vanish. Early caliphal governors, aware of the complexities of ruling Persia, retained Persian scribes to keep tax registers and manage land records. The Kharaj land tax, once the backbone of Sasanian revenue, continued to flow, now redirected to the coffers of the caliphate. In city after city, Persian scribes known as kutab adapted to Arabic rule, recording transactions in both Middle Persian and Arabic. The continuity of tax collection and local administration helped stabilize the conquered territories, even as the language of power began to shift. Yet, beneath the surface of new rule, the Persian language remained a vessel of identity. While Arabic became the tongue of law and theology, Persian endured as the language of poetry, storytelling, and courtly correspondence. Across the centuries, this resilience would become a hallmark of Iranian culture. In the 10th and 11th centuries, as the caliphate's grip loosened, a literary revival took root. Nowhere was this more evident than in the work of Ferdowsi, who spent 3 decades composing the Shahnameh, the Book of Kings. Completed around 1010 AD, the Shahnameh drew on ancient legends, royal chronicles, and oral traditions, weaving them into over 50,000 couplets of Persian verse. Ferdowsi's epic did more than preserve stories of ancient kings and heroes. It restored Persian as a literary language, offering a counterweight to the dominance of Arabic. The Shahnameh's verses, recited in courts and bazaars alike, became a repository of collective memory. Through famine, conquest, and foreign rule, the Persian language remained a thread unbroken, a living link to the past. As new dynasties rose and fell, and as the Mongol storm gathered on the horizon, the endurance of Persian words and stories offered a quiet form of resistance, sustaining a sense of nationhood that no conqueror could erase. In the 13th century, the Iranian plateau became the crucible of devastation. Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis, led Mongol armies across the Zagros, leaving behind cities reduced to ash and fields sown with bones. Archaeologists still unearth mass graves near Nishapur and Merv, grim evidence of a campaign that, by some estimates, erased up to 3/4 of the population in certain provinces. Urban burn layers, thick deposits of charcoal, and shattered masonry testify to the scale of destruction. Mongol siege engineers, drawing on Chinese technology, unleashed catapults and fire projectors against the mud brick walls of Ray and Isfahan, overwhelming defenders who had never faced such machines. The shock of conquest did not end with the sword. Libraries, bazaars, and mosques were swept away in the firestorm, and the old order of Persian patronage collapsed. Yet, in the shadow of ruin, a strange renewal began. The Mongol Ilkhans, once destroyers, turned to the Persian scribes and architects who survived. Hulagu established his capital at Maraga, inviting scholars from every corner of the known world. Persian became the language of administration, and Mongol rulers adopted the visual and ceremonial codes of their new homeland. In Tabriz and Sultaniya, construction resumed. Domes were rebuilt. Minarets rose from rubble. Court poets composed verses in the tongue of Ferdowsi. The pattern repeated under Timur, the conqueror from the steppe who razed cities with one hand and rebuilt them with the other. His armies leveled the walls of Herat and Shiraz, but soon after, Timurid patronage revived Persian art and architecture. Timurid palaces glittered with blue tile and calligraphy, their forms echoing the grandeur of earlier dynasties. In the aftermath, the Iranian plateau bore scars of violence, but also the seeds of a new cultural synthesis, a world where conquerors became patrons, and the memory of loss fueled a renaissance in poetry, science, and faith. In the early 16th century, a new dynasty rose from the highlands of Ardabil. Shah Ismail, crowned in Tabriz in 1501, proclaimed Twelver Shia as the creed of his realm. It was an act that would forever distinguish Iran from its Sunni neighbors. The royal decree was not merely a theological statement. It became a blueprint for a new national identity, binding faith and kingship in a single, unyielding vision. The Safavid state, forged in the crucible of sectarian struggle, began to recast the Iranian plateau in its own image. Under Shah Abbas I, the Safavid project reached its zenith. Abbas moved his capital to Isfahan, transforming the city into a showcase of imperial ambition and religious devotion. The urban plan unfolded with geometric precision, avenues radiating from the monumental Naqsh-e-Jahan Square, flanked by the Shah Mosque, the Ali Kapu Palace, and the bustling bazaar. Each stone, each tile, was set with purpose to declare the glory of Shia kingship and the unity of the Safavid order. Court architects and artisans, drawn from across the empire and beyond, labored to create a city that mirrored the cosmic order. The blue domes of the Shah Mosque rose above the skyline, their calligraphic bands inscribed with verses from the Quran and the names of the 12 imams. In the palace halls, miniature painters and poets found new patrons, producing illuminated manuscripts and epic verses that blended Persian tradition with Shia symbolism. The adoption of Shia belief as the state creed was enforced by a network of clerics and royal officials, their authority extending from the court to the furthest village. Pilgrimage routes to the shrines of Qom and Mashhad became arteries of devotion and commerce. Isfahan's gardens and pavilions set the standard for elegance across the Islamic world. Through creed and capital, the Safavids inscribed a distinct Iranian identity that would endure invasions, revolutions, and the shifting tides of empire. By the late Qajar era, Iran's rulers faced mounting foreign pressure and a treasury on the brink. To keep the state afloat, Nasir al-Din Shah began granting sweeping concessions to European companies. In March 1890, he handed the entire tobacco trade to a British firm for £15,000 and 6% royalties, giving them power to set prices, evict merchants, and collect taxes. The deal, struck in secret, quickly leaked. In bazaars and mosques, outrage spread. Sheikh Fazlullah Nuri and other clerics condemned the concession as both economic betrayal and religious violation. A fatwa soon declared tobacco use sinful. Pamphlets circulated, sermons thundered, and shopkeepers closed their doors. In Tehran, tobacco pipes vanished from tea houses almost overnight. British reports noted tobacco consumption in the city fell by more than half, while state customs revenue from tobacco collapsed from over 1 million reals to less than half that amount. Troops hesitated to move against crowds where clerics and merchants stood together. The Shah, facing a paralyzed market and a legitimacy crisis, canceled the concession in January 1892, paying £500,000 in compensation, a devastating blow to state finances. But the unrest did not fade. New concessions over oil, railways, and banking followed, fueling more anger. The Reuter oil concession of 1901 and the Caspian Sea Railway contract became rallying points for activists. Networks of merchants, clerics, and journalists, first united by the tobacco boycott, now pressed for broader change. By the summer of 1906, strikes and petitions filled Tehran's streets. The Shah, unable to rule by decree, issued a royal proclamation for the first Majlis, an elected parliament to oversee budgets and foreign contracts. Among the crowds stood Sadr Khan, a cavalryman from Tabriz, soon to become a symbol of resistance. The Majlis marked Iran's first step toward constitutional government, born from years of foreign encroachment and civic mobilization. Steel rails carved through Iran in the 1930s, linking remote towns to Tehran and pulling the country into the orbit of modern power. Reza Shah Pahlavi, once a brigadier, drove the Trans-Iranian Railway over mountains and deserts, determined to shape a new nation from the fragments of empire. His reforms swept across daily life, unveiling women, standardizing schools, seizing clerical lands, and reviving ancient symbols as banners of unity. The Persian language became the voice of law and learning. Yet the speed and force of change left scars, stirring resentment among the old elite and the rural poor. In 1951, Mohammad Mossadegh, a patrician with roots in both European law and Persian tradition, nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. His defiance of British control sparked a crisis that drew in Washington and London. 2 years later, declassified CYA files detail the mechanics of intervention, coded messages, cash-filled suitcases, and staged protests. On August 19, 1953, tanks rolled into Tehran. Mossadegh was arrested, and the monarchy, now under Mohammad Reza Shah, returned with foreign support. The coup deepened Iran's sense of vulnerability to outside hands. The Shah's second reign brought more reforms, land redistribution, industrial growth, and voting rights for women. But the pace, enforced by secret police and fueled by oil, widened the gap between rulers and ruled. Discontent simmered in mosques and universities. In 1979, unrest erupted. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, long exiled, returned to a nation in revolt. Crowds filled Tehran, the monarchy collapsed, and the Islamic Republic was born by referendum. The old order vanished overnight, replaced by a regime promising justice and independence. A year later, Iraq invaded. The war between Iran and Iraq lasted 8 years, claiming between 500,000 and 1 million lives. Cities burned, villages emptied, but the Republic endured. Through war's furnace, Iran's sense of nationhood was battered but not broken. The language, the faith, and the battered state survived, carrying forward a legacy of resilience. Across millennia, Iran's boundaries have shifted, but its identity endures, a testament to adaptation, not stasis. Today, nearly 90 million people still speak Persian, practice ancient traditions, and debate their future on the world stage. In a region defined by upheaval, Iran's story insists that continuity is itself a form of power. History remains unfinished, and its next chapter is written in real time. Share your perspective below.